Today, we're going to be starting with the foundation of this course, which is not memorizing biological terms, but understanding how biologists study life. Before we talk about cells, genes, or ecosystems, we need to talk about how scientific knowledge is built and why it is considered reliable. This chapter introduces the process of science and the major ideas that connects all of biology. My goal is for you to leave this chapter feeling more comfortable with scientific thinking, even if science has not always been or felt intuitive or accessible in the past. Biology is about asking good questions, using scientific evidence, and being willing to revise ideas when new information becomes available. Everything we covered this semester connects back to these core ideas. So, thinking of this chapter as a framework we'll keep returning to as we explore life at different levels. Biology is the study of life, but more importantly, it is the study of how we come to understand life. This course is not just about learning biological facts, it's about learning how scientists think, how they ask questions, and how they decide whether an explanation is reliable. When biologists study living systems, they rely on observation, evidence, and careful reasoning rather than assumption or personal beliefs. Understanding this process matters because biology affects everyday decisions from health and medicine to environmental issues. Learning how science works will help you evaluate information critically, especially in a world where scientific claims are constantly being shared through media and social platforms. Science operates as a process rather than a strict set of steps. It begins with curiosity about the natural world and develops through observation, questioning, testing, and analysis. Scientists rarely follow a single fixed path. Instead, they move back and forth between ideas and evidence as new information becomes available. This process allows scientific knowledge to grow over time. Explanations are always open to refinement, which means science is self correcting. Rather than seeking absolute certainty, scientists aim to build explanations that are strongly supported by evidence. Exploration is where scientific thinking really begins. Scientists observe patterns in nature and ask why those patterns exist. This might involve noticing changes in populations, unexpected results in experiments, or unusual behavior in organisms. Exploration helps transform curiosity into meaningful questions that can be studied. At this stage, scientists often gather background information and review what they already know. This helps them refine their questions and avoid repeating work that has already been done. Exploration is an ongoing part of scientific and science and continues even after the experiments are completed. Once a focused question is formed, a scientist proposes a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a testable and falsifiable explanation for an observation. This means there must be a clear way to collect evidence that could either support or fail to support the idea. Testing can take different forms. In some cases, experiments are used where conditions are carefully controlled. In other cases, scientists rely on observations, especially when working with systems that cannot be manipulated directly. What matters is that the evidence is collected systematically and analyzed objectively. Scientific testing follows a logical sequence. Scientists use their hypothesis to make predictions about what should happen if their explanation is correct. They then gather data through experiments or observations and analyze those results carefully. The conclusions drawn depends on the evidence, not on the expectations or preferences. This approach allows scientists to address real-world problems in a reliable way. Whether studying disease, ecosystems, or biological processes in the human body, the process of science helps ensure that conclusions are based on evidence and careful reasoning rather than guesswork. Science does not end once data is collected. What scientists discover becomes meaningful only when it is shared. Communication is a core part of the scientific process because it allows the ideas to be evaluated, questioned, and built upon by others. Scientists share their work through journal articles, conferences, seminars, and discussions with colleagues. This communication helps refine scientific thinking. When results are shared, they can lead to new questions, new studies, or new ways of understanding a problem. In this way, science is collaborative rather than isolated, and knowledge grows through collective efforts. Scientific communication allows specific standards to ensure clarity and reliability. When scientists publish their work, they describe their methods, results, and interpretations so they can understand exactly what is being done. This transparency allows other scientists to evaluate the work and, if needed, repeat the study. Before research is publicized, it is usually reviewed by experts in the field who are not involved in the study. This process helps each other find errors, improve clarity, and maintain quality. While peer review does not guarantee perfection, it greatly increases confidence in the scientific finding. The outcome of the scientific research includes more than just answers. Sometimes results support the hypothesis, and other times they challenge it. Both outcomes are valuable because they contribute to a more accurate understanding of the natural world. Scientific outcomes often lead to new questions rather than final conclusions. As knowledge grows, explanations become more refined, and the cycle of explanation and testing continues. This ongoing process is why science is constantly evolving. The process of science functions as a cycle. Communications lead to new explorations, and outcomes lead to new questions. Scientists form hypotheses, make predictions, conduct experiments or observations, gather data, interpret those results, and draw conclusions. These steps are connected and often repeated. This cyclical nature explains why science is never truly finished. Each discovery adds to our understanding while also revealing new areas to explore. In science, certain words have very specific meanings, and they are often different from how we use them in everyday conversation. A theory in science is not a guess or an opinion. A scientific theory is a broad explanation that is supported by a large and growing body of evidence. Theories help explain many observations at once and allow scientists to make new, testable predictions. What makes a theory strong is not certainty but evidence. Even well-established theories can be refined or revised if new data emerges. This willingness to adjust explanation is what keeps science relatable and reliable over time. A fact is a piece of information that has been repeatedly confirmed through observations or experimentation. Facts are important, but collecting facts alone is not the main goal of science. Science focuses on explaining on how and why those facts fit together. You can think of facts as individual pieces of a puzzle. Theories help connect those pieces into a larger, meaningful picture. Biology emphasizes explanations that apply across many situations rather than isolated details. To test hypotheses, scientists often rely on controlled experiments. In these experiments, researchers change one factor while keeping all the other conditions as constant as possible. These changing factors are called variables. A controlled experiment includes at least two groups. One group serves as the control group and does not receive the factor being tested. The other group is the experimental group that does receive the factor. Comparing these groups helps determine whether the variable being tested is responsible for the observed outcome. The variable that is being intentionally changed by the researcher is called the independent variable. That is the factor that scientists believe may be causing a particular effect. The response that is measured is called the dependent variable because it depends on changes in the independent variable. For example, if a study is testing a new medication, the medication itself would be the independent variable, and the patient's response, such as the changes in the blood pressure, would be the dependent variable. By clearly defining these variables, scientists can design experiments that are easier to interpret. Well-designed experiments usually test only one independent variable at a time. This is important because if multiple factors change at once, it becomes difficult to know which one caused the observed result. Controlling variables help scientists draw clear evidence-based conclusions and reduce the chances of misleading results. In many medical studies, researchers use a placebo, which is an inactive treatment that resembles a real one. This helps determine whether changes are caused by a treatment itself or by the expectations. In a double-blind experiment, neither the participants nor the researcher knows who receives the treatment or the placebo until after the data is collected. This type of study design helps reduce bias and increases confidence in the results. It is considered the gold standard for many medical studies because it relies on careful controls and objective measurements. Not all claims that sound scientific are actually based on science. One of the most important skills you can develop is learning how to tell the difference between evidence-based science and pseudoscience. Pseudoscience refers to the ideas or practices that present themselves as scientific but do not follow the scientific process. Pseudoscientific claims often rely heavily on personal stories, testimonials, or dramatic language rather than controlled experiments and data. This type of evidence is called anecdotal evidence. While the personal experiences can feel convincing, they do not provide enough information to draw reliable scientific conclusions. Science depends on careful testing, relatable results, and critical evaluation by others. Being able to recognize pseudoscience helps you avoid misinformation, makes informed decisions, especially when scientific claims are connected to health, the environment, or everyday choices. Pseudoscience is any field or claim that presents itself as scientific without actually following the scientific process. These claims often lack controlled experiments, peer review, or reproducible results. They may also avoid testing ideas in ways that could prove them wrong. In contrast, real science welcomes testing and scrutiny. Scientific explanations are often open to being challenged and revised based on evidence. Recognizing the difference between science and pseudoscience helps protect us from misinformation and allows us to make better decisions based on reliable knowledge. A helpful way to understand this difference is by looking at examples. A field biologist collects data in nature, is engaged in science because observations are systematic and evidence is recorded and analyzed. The goal is to understand patterns using data. In other hands, claims that object or structure channels mysterious energy without measurable evidence falls into pseudoscience. These claims often sound impressive but lack testable explanations or supported data. Science depends on evidence that can be measured, tested, and verified by others. One of the most effective ways to evaluate a scientific claim is to consider its source. Reliable scientific information usually comes from peer-reviewed journals where studies are evaluated by qualified experts before publication. This process helps ensure accuracy and accountability. While peer review does not mean a study is perfect, it does mean that the work has been examined critically by others in the field. Claims that bypass this process or rely solely on self-published sources should be approached with caution. When evaluating scientific information, it helps to have a mental checklist. Reliable sources are current, clearly written by qualified authors, and transparent about their information comes from. Scientific work should include references so others can trace ideas back to their original evidence. Another key feature of reliable science is reproducibility. Methods should be described clearly enough that other scientists could actually repeat the work and check the results. Reliable sources also present information in a balanced way, without exaggerating or hiding agendas. These habits help maintain trust in scientific knowledge. Now we shift from how science works to what biology studies. Biologists generally agree that living things share a set defined characteristics. Something is considered alive when it displays all of the properties together, not just one or two. This distinction matters because some non-living things may show individual traits of life, such as movement or growth, but they do not meet all the criteria. Biology focuses on understanding how these shared properties defines life across many forms. Living organisms are organized, meaning they have the structured arrangement of parts from molecules up to cells and beyond. They use energy to maintain that organization and carry out processes like growth and repair. Living systems also regulate their internal conditions, a process known as homeostasis. Another key property of life is reproduction and the ability to pass genetic information from one generation to the next. Living organisms also respond to their environment, and over generation populations evolve. Together, these properties help distinguish life from non-life. Even though all living organisms share these core properties, life on Earth is incredibly diverse. From bacteria to plants to animals, organisms vary widely in structure, size, and function. Biology seeks to understand both what unites life and what makes it so varied. Scientists also use these same properties when thinking about the possibilities of life beyond Earth. If extraterrestrial life exists, it would be likely share these fundamental characteristics, even if it looks very different from life as we know it. To make sense of life's complexity, biologists rely on a few unifying themes. These themes include the relationship between structure and function, the flow of information, the transformation of energy and matter, as well as the interactions within biological systems and evolution. These ideas appear again and again throughout biology, from molecules to ecosystems. Keeping these themes in mind helps connect topics that might otherwise seem unrelated and provides a framework for understanding the living world as an integrated whole. One of the most important ideas in biology is that structure and function are closely related. The way something is built directly influences what it can do. This relationship appears at every level of biological organization, from molecules to entire organisms. When you understand that structure of a biological system, its function often makes more sense. This principle helps maintain why biological structures look the way they do and why changes in structures can affect how something works. This relationship between structure and function can be seen in many examples. The branching structures of the lungs increase the surface area, allowing more oxygen to move into the bloodstream. Red blood cells have a distinctive shape that increases their ability to carry oxygen efficiently. These examples show how biological structures are not just random, they are shaped by the demands of their function. Life depends on the ability to receive, transmit, and respond to information. Information flow occurs at every level of biology. Cells communicate with others, organs respond to signals, and entire organisms adjust their behavior based on environmental cues. For example, your body monitors blood glucose levels in the blood and responds by releasing hormones that help maintain balance. This communication system allows organisms to coordinate complex processes and maintain stability. At the cellular level, information is stored in genes. Genes are units of heredity information made up of DNA and passed from one generation to the next. This genetic information provides instructions for building and maintaining an organism. Although DNA is made up of just 4 chemical building blocks, the sequence of those blocks contains enormous amounts of information. Differences in gene sequences contributes to the diversity of life and influences traits at both the cellular and organismal level. Disruption in information flow can lead to disease. For example, in type 1 diabetes, the body's immune system attacks the cells in the pancreas that produces insulin. As a result, the body cannot properly respond to information about glucose levels in the blood. Modern biology allows scientists to address these problems in innovative ways. Insulin used to treat diabetics can be produced by genetically engineering bacteria that carry the human gene. This example shows how understanding information flow can lead to practical medical applications. All living systems require energy and matter to survive. Organisms constantly take in energy and materials from their environment and transform them into forms that allow them to grow, repair themselves, and maintain organization. These transformations follow specific biological pathways. Energy does not appear out of nowhere, and it does not disappear. Instead, it is transformed and transferred. Understanding how energy and matter move through the living systems helps explain systems from metabolism within the cell's energy flow through an ecosystem. At the cellular level, chemical reactions break down molecules to release energy or build new molecules that an organism needs. These reactions are organized into pathways so they occur in controlled and efficient ways. Without these pathways, cells would not be able to function. Life depends on the precise regulation of energy transformation, which allows organisms to carry out complex processes while maintaining internal balance. Energy and matter also move through an ecosystem. Energy typically enters ecosystems through sunlight, which is captured by producers such as plants and algae. That energy is then transferred to consumers as organisms eat each other. Matter, unlike energy, is recycled. Elements like carbon and nitrogen move through the ecosystem in cycles. Understanding these transformations helps explain why ecosystems function and why disruptions can actually have widespread effects. At every energy level of biology, energy and matter are linked. Cells rely on energy to build and maintain structures. Organisms rely on energy to survive and reproduce. And ecosystems rely on energy flow to support life. These pathways connect individual organisms to their environment. No living system exists in isolation, and changes in energy availability can affect biological processes across multiple levels. Living systems are made up of interacting parts, from molecules interacting inside cells to organisms interacting with ecosystems. These connections create complexity. A system becomes more complex, new properties emerge, that were not present at simpler levels. These emergent properties arise from the arrangement and interactions of parts rather than from any single component alone. Understanding interactions helps explain why biology cannot be reduced to just one level of organization and why context matters when studying life. Biology examines life across multiple levels of organization, from the smallest chemical components to the entire living planet. At the most basic level, we study molecules and cells. As we zoom out, we look at tissues, organs, whole organisms, populations, ecosystems, and ultimately the biosphere. Each level builds on one below it, but each also has its own patterns and behaviors. What happens at the cellular level influences the organism, and what happens at the organismal level can affect the entire ecosystem. To really understand life, biologists constantly move between these levels and connect processes across scales. When we look at life on Earth, we see two striking features at the same time: unity and diversity. All living organisms share basic characteristics such as being made up of cells and using DNA as a genetic material. At the same time, life exists at an incredible variety of forms, sizes, and functions. Evolution provides the scientific explanation for both of these observations. Evolution is defined as change over time in populations of organisms. It explains how modern species arose from earlier ancestors and why organisms share common features while also showing important differences. Evolution is considered the central theme in biology because it connects all areas of the field. Similarities among organisms make sense when we understand that they share common ancestry. Differences make sense when we consider how populations adapt to different environments over time. This perspective allows biologists to study life as a connected system, rather than isolated facts. Whether we are studying genes, anatomy, behavior, or ecosystems, evolution provides the framework that ties everything together and gives biological observations meaning. The modern theory of evolution came widely accepted after Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859. Darwin proposed that species living today descended from an ancestral species in a process called descent with modification. Over long periods of time, small changes accumulated, leading to the diversity of life we see today. Darwin also identified natural selection as the key mechanism driving evolution changes. Individuals within a population vary in their traits, and some of those traits influence survival and reproduction. When certain traits increase the chances of passing on the gene to the next generation, those traits become more common over time. When resources are limited, organisms are in what Darwin described as a struggle for existence. This does not always mean direct competition or conflict. It often means competing for food, spaces, mates, or simply the ability to survive long enough to reproduce. In this context, individuals within a population vary in their traits, and some of these traits happen to be better suited to the local environment. Individuals with traits that improve survival or reproduction are more likely to live longer and reproduce more healthy offspring. This difference is reproductive success is the key idea. Evolution does not depend on who survives alone, but who successfully passes on their traits to the next generation. Darwin used the term natural selection to describe this process because the environment effectively selects which heritable traits becomes more common. The environment does not create traits or make choices, but it favors certain existing traits over others. Over many generations, this unequal reproduction success leads to changes in populations that helps explain how species evolved over time. Natural selection is often misunderstood, so it is important to be very clear about what it does and what it does not do. Natural selection does not plan, guide, or encourage changes in organisms. There is no goal, intention, or direction behind it. Instead, genetic changes, which we call mutations, occur randomly. They are not reproduced because an organism needs them or because an environment demands them. Once those random mutations exist in a population, natural selection acts like a filter. It does not create new traits, but it edits what is already there. If a mutation happens to improve an organism's ability to survive or reproduce in a specific environment, individuals with that trait are more likely to pass on to the next generation. Over time, those beneficial traits become more common, not because they were chosen deliberately, but because they worked better under those conditions. These inherited traits are called adaptations. Adaptations explain why organisms appear so well suited for their environment, even though the process that produced them is entirely natural and unguided. Understanding this distinction helps prevent the common misconception that evolution happens because organisms try to change. This family tree is a visual way of representing evolutionary relationships among animals. It shows how different groups are connected through common ancestry rather than ranking organisms as more or less advanced. Each branching point represents a shared ancestor, and each branch reflects divergence over time as populations adapted to different environments. What is important to recognize is that all of these groups are equally evolved. Humans are not the endpoint of evolution, and no living species is more evolved than the other. Each lineage has been shaped by natural selection to survive on its own environment under specific conditions. This kind of evolutionary tree helps biologists organize the diversity of life and make predictions about shared traits. If two groups share a common ancestor, they are more likely to have similar structures, genes, or developmental patterns. This reinforces the idea that the unity and diversity in life are two sides of the same evolutionary process. As we move forward in this course, this evolutionary perspective will keep coming up. Whether we are studying cells, physiology, ecosystems, or human biology, evolution provides the framework that connects everything we have discussed in this chapter.